Welcome to the Recovery.com podcast. I'm Dr. Mala, editor-in-chief at Recovery.com, and today I'm joined by fellow hosts Cliff McDonald, chief growth officer at Recovery.com. Hi, Cliff.
Hi, Dr. Mala. It's great to be here with you. And Wes, super excited to spend some time with you today. And of course, Amanda, always wonderful to spend time with you as well.
Thank you. And also, as Cliff said, Amanda Uphoff, chief of staff at Recovery.com. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, everybody. Really excited for this conversation. Hi, Wes.
Yeah. Today, we're thrilled to have Wes Arnett join us, a Wisconsin State certified peer support specialist and a passionate advocate for the peer support movement, which he refers to as the Army of Hope. And we are so excited to have him join us today. Welcome, Wes.
Yeah, thank you, guys. I've been looking forward to this. I appreciate the opportunity, and I love what you guys are doing, and we're just honored to be invited and get to talk a little bit about something that I'm really passionate about and that I am kind of making my life work at this point in time. So yeah, very excited to be here.
It's so wonderful. So I would love for you to share with our audience a little bit about your personal journey into recovery. What did that look like? And, what has your journey entailed?
Yeah, how many hours do we have to go through this, right? No,
Yeah.
To just really make it kind of brief, and maybe that'll elicit some dialogue or whatnot. But I kind of referred to my substance use was really it was a running and jumping off of a cliff, and it was really an escape. It was to drown, and it was to do that for a lot of things. It was to escape and drown loneliness that I was experiencing. It was to escape the stress of being a sole business owner, having 4 kids under the age of 5, escaping fear. Fear was a big component, looking back or hindsight. Anxiety, the death of my father, and some guilt associations with that. Really just trying to, escape and drown life. And, it was the epitome of using a substance to drown my sorrows. But nobody ever told me that sorrow knows how to swim. And so that's kind of really where I found myself. And I kind of describe my recovery as being a little bit over an 8-year sort of a process before things kind of stuck finally for me. And, that sticking for me really, it was a compilation of some things. And I think the biggest pieces were it was negative consequence after negative consequence after negative consequences, just building and building. And that ultimately led to finally a sustained change for me and that long-term recovery. I became sick and tired of being sick and tired. And it really took some significant negative consequences for me in my substance use to really hit home. And I think the biggest one for me was a threat of losing my kids. As you mentioned, I'm a father of 4. They're my world. Crap, it's amazing how you get emotional already, but they were my world. And I was really stuck in this vicious cycle of giving up everything, including them, for this one thing. And so it was really that kind of that negative consequence and that threat that really propelled me into the foundations of early recovery, long-term recovery. And I think there was maybe 4 guiding principles that I can kind of point to that really guided me in early recovery, that were the foundation for my long-term recovery. And and this is all thinking back, and you really reflect and you unpack some crap, right? But for me it was, and for me long-term recovery is abstinence. That's my pathway. That's what I needed, or that's what I need and want. But those foundational pieces for me in early recovery were accountability. service, addressing trauma through therapy, and a very concerted effort on self-care. Yeah. So I think that kind of probably really succinctly, sums up my recovery and substance use in a little bit of a nutshell there.
Yeah. How did you get to that place where you landed on knowing those were the pillars that you needed to lean on? And then how did you progress to define each of those pillars for yourself?
Yeah, well, one of them was actually enforced upon me, and I despised it to beat the band, man. I hated it. Looking back, it was the absolute best thing for me, and that was the accountability piece. And it was forced upon me just in the sense of at one point in time, I had lost the ability to have any placement of my kids. I'm divorced. I had lost the ability to have any time with my kids because of the substance use. Yeah, one second. So, anyways, the accountability piece really came in with the use of a device called SoberLink. And that darn thing was attached to my hip for over 2.5 years. And what it is, for people that don't know, is it's a handheld, a little bit bigger than a cell phone and much thicker. But it's a device that I carried around with me, and it was a breathalyzer. And I would have to take between 6 and 8 tests every single day, morning through night. It takes a snapshot of your picture when you take it, uploads your picture, sends your results to a variety of people. In my case, it was my ex, it was my GAL. And ultimately, the results of those tests would dictate placement of my children. And so every 3 months that I didn't have a single positive result, my placement would increase until eventually it got to the full placement. And we have 50-50 custody. So that was a huge, and I used to think of that when I first was forced to use it. I struggled with it. I was like, hey, this is my babysitter. But I kind of flipped it around, and I kind of, in a way, this might not be appropriate, but I kind of saw it as every single test I took was a big FU. It was a big FU to the doubters. It was a big hell yeah for me. Um, and it added up over time, and I still have all my records, because you get a record. I still have 2.5 records of, 6 to 8 negative tests for 2.5 years straight, and what that meant. So yeah, that was the accountability piece. And I think some of the accountability is a big part of recovery in general. At least I believe that it is. And some of the other pieces are, like I mentioned, service. The books you read, groups that you go to, AA, SMART, Buddhist principle group, whatever, they really emphasize a service approach. And for me, that service looked like I volunteered quite a bit. And because of my profession, I dove headlong into fostering. So I fostered 16, I was part of a Great Dane rescue, and I fostered 16 Great Danes in a year's time period. And it just became this service. I mean, I was driving to South Dakota and Minnesota and Iowa and picking up these dogs and keeping them in my house for however long. And it was a service thing, and volunteering. And so, yeah, I think that's where some of those principles came, is just, self-care. Self-care is just, that gets reinforced by your sponsor, your counselor, your therapist. And for me, self-care, I mean, there was a number of things, but man, early recovery, I binged show after show after show. I think I went through Breaking Bad and the Game of Thrones in like a week each, and it was just to take my mind away from things. Every weekend I would pack up this cargo van that I bought, and I was hiking, and I would hike the Ice Age Trail. Haven't finished it 100%. I'm about a little over 50% of the way. But that became a self-care thing for me. Nature, walking, that sort of a thing. So yeah, I think hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, Wes, Cliff here. I identify as someone in long-term recovery as well. I'm also comfortable calling myself a recovering alcoholic. Alcohol was my drug of choice. And man, you bring back some memories with the SoberLink thing, man. I was so sick that, and I had never been in trouble my whole life, and I had a DWI, and I had one of those devices in my car. And the obsession was so great with me that I could time my drinking to know exactly how many drinks I could have the night before. It's a lot. If I can, figure out I can have, this many drinks by 10 p.m. and then go to bed, and in the morning I'll blow clean. And then if I go to a meeting, right, I can have, one drink because I know I don't have to start my car an hour later. And looking back, it's just like, man, I was so obsessed with alcohol was my master, because that's what it says in the book. And hearing you with the accountability. So forced sobriety is really interesting, right?
It is,
like
yeah.
Forced sobriety happens when people are incarcerated. Forced sobriety happens when we have these things. A lot of people I really respect say that it's really not good when you're forced to be sobriety. There's such a difference between that and choosing it and doing it yourself. And we know so many people who are incarcerated come out, the first thing they do is go to the liquor store, right?
Yeah.
So once you had those protective measures removed, right, how did you shift your management then, right? Because you don't have the babysitter anymore. It's not F you, I passed again.
Yeah.
And did you drink again once those were removed, or did you keep going on the right path?
No, I stayed on the right path. And I think for me, so initially I was only required to use sober, and that thing is sensitive as heck, man. You brush your teeth and you take the test within 15 minutes, it's going to show something. You chew a piece of gum, like it was very sensitive. And I had to do it all hours of the day, not just like, okay, I'm not going to drive for 24 hours. So, like it was, anyways, initially I only had to use it on placement days, when they would allow me to see my children, to prove that I wasn't drinking while they were there. Well, initially, then I would drink on my off days, because since I didn't have to use it. But I realized very quickly that I saw the benefits of the SoberLink, and I actually made the change to our agreement to do it without fail 7 days a week on non-placement days as well. And I was only required to do that in terms of getting to that full placement for about a year and a half. It was a little bit under a year and a half. And so it was a personal choice of mine to keep that accountability in place at that point for me, for another year. It went a little bit over beyond a year. And at that point, and what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to fill my cup, fill my tool belt with many more resources, get long. I mean, a really good statistic is the longer you are in a program or a whatever you want to call it, treatment, a program, the higher the success rate. And so it gave me a whole nother year of working my own program, to where when I was ready to drop it, I was ready to drop it because I felt very, very comfortable and confident. I had my cup was filled with other things that I knew in those times of, that I might have jumped off the cliff anymore, stress or whatever it might be. I had things in place to be able to manage those as a non-alcoholic.
Yeah, for sure. and you realizing, you know what? I'm kind of better when I'm not drinking, right?
Oh, yeah.
What a concept. And things, are more manageable, right? So I can definitely relate to
that. There's no problem too great that drinking can't make worse. That's a phrase that I'll tell my peers a lot.
Man.
It's still going to be there in the morning. And if anything, it's just going to make it that much worse.
Well, I think it's great, Wes, because I think what you're sharing is that, forced sobriety can be a great phase one, right? If you have the other things, right? And you did, and you had the wherewithal and the resources to, build your program while you were doing that. I'm going to shift a little bit. This time always goes really fast, especially when we get people who are really willing to be vulnerable, and you are. So thank you so much, man. We dove right in. I know you personally. I love learning more about you in this capacity. I've got tremendous respect for you and what you're doing. I want to go back, Wes, early childhood, teenage years, were you surprised when you became someone that identified as someone that struggled with addiction or alcoholism? Or looking back, is that path pretty clear? Were you an early starter, right? Did you run with a rowdy crowd? Tell me about like Wes' early years, man. I know nothing about that.
Well, I used to have a mullet, but that gives you some idea of the change, right?
Yeehaw.
Looking back, it's not a surprise to me. Looking back, drinking was a very, very big. I lived with a stepfather who was an alcoholic. I can remember birthdays where it was bad. My birthday, him grilling out and being blitzed off his butt. But I grew up with a stepfather who was an alcoholic. My father's side of the family, addiction ran pretty deep, and in particular alcohol. My grandfather on my dad's side was an alcoholic, died because of complications associated with alcohol use. My father really wasn't, and I think my father really wasn't. He had some medical problems like the last 20 years of his life, and I think that contributed to not drinking. But I can't think of a time where I ever saw my father drink too much per se. Can I remember him at a Thanksgiving, maybe having some wine with a toast, toast and wine or something? Sure. But it was not a heavy piece. But my uncles, who I spent a great amount of time with my father, we had a cabin that we went to every weekend throughout the year. There was a lot of alcohol around from a very early age. One of my siblings both of them really, but one of them has very severe ties to addiction, both with illicit drug use and with alcohol. So the ties run pretty deep. Yeah. So I think looking back, and then my use, I was a binger. I was a binger in college. I really didn't drink until I got to college, undergrad. Maybe a couple of times in high school, but not really. I was off fishing and hiking and mountain biking, and that just wasn't a part of the crowd that I hung with. In undergrad is where it really started for me, and I was a big binger. And maybe that's kind of classic for a lot of individuals in undergrad. You hear about it a lot. But the interesting thing, and I would binge on weekends, but I would still manage to get pretty much straight A's through undergrad, functioning, even by limiting it on the weekends. Interesting thing, during vet school, I didn't hardly drink at all. Like not a single, very, very rarely. We might, if a group of us were going to go out after exams or something, we might go down to the Blue Moon and have a couple of beers or something. But it really wasn't a part of my life during the 4 years of veterinary medical school. It just wasn't. So there was a shift there from undergrad to vet med. And then it really started to kind of take off after vet school, when I was, probably like 3-4 years into my career at that point. And I think a lot of the driving factors were some of the things I mentioned before. I was escaping.
Yeah,
and that's what I really kind of turned to.
I commend you for your honesty there, in saying, that I sought relief because I had stresses in life, and I can relate, man. My drinking changed dramatically when my dad died.
Yeah.
The drinking changed dramatically when I had 3 kids, and my wife and my relationship changed a little bit, and it was, woe is me. And I don't know if that's the inability to live life on life's terms, but that's the progressive nature of the disease, and we choose to escape. And we don't know. Now we know. It's so clear now. That's what I was doing. I didn't know it at the time. You probably didn't either. Wes, do you remember a moment when you knew like your drinking was dangerous? And I do, like when I drank in the morning or whatever it is. Do you remember like that? Like, I know I shouldn't be doing this and it's on a bad trajectory.
Drinking and driving.
Yeah.
It was a consistent thing for me when I was very deep in the throes of my addiction, to where I literally would pick up 2 to 3 bottles of wine, and I would have at least one gone by the time I reached home.
And so sophisticated wine. That was your
Right,
thing,
right?
huh? No kidding.
Yep, red
Yeah.
wine, red wine. The funny thing is, the name of the one that was my favorite was Ball Buster. I don't
Yeah.
know why, but it was this deep red wine, and like, yeah, not beer. Beer was an undergrad and that
Yeah.
sort of a thing, and I should also mention I am originally from California, and the culture here, that is a market change. The culture here was crazy compared to California. When I moved from California with my wife, we moved to La Crosse. And out here it was NASCAR, beer, and there's a bar on pretty much every other corner. And I fell into that a little bit. And that's when beer really became that's when I can really point to that and say, man, that was a change for me. And I remember picking up, a 30 pack of Busch Light or whatever. And I had never done that before, and it was a big culture shift.
I mean, you said veterinarian school, vet animals, love it. Um, you had 2 decades as a veterinarian and a small business owner. Obviously, there were things that happened. What inspired you to formally change your career path and
Yeah.
start on the peer support movement?
So I'm an entrepreneur at heart, really. And one of the reasons I went into vet med was because I wanted to run my own business. I liked the medical field, if you will, and science. But MDs don't really get the opportunity to run their own business. Yeah, maybe a chiropractor here or there isn't corporate owned, or an optometrist, but um, my family dog at the time, this was an undergrad when I was kind of making a decision, was having a lot of medical problems. My wrestling coach, his wife was our veterinarian, our family veterinarian. And so that's when I was like, okay, maybe. And so as an entrepreneur at heart, I really felt like I saw it as a challenge. I saw it as a way to try and build something great. And so ultimately, that was the direction that I went. Now, in terms of this shift, for me, there was a couple of things, probably two that really come to mind. One was that led to this new chapter. One was I had achieved all the goals that I had ever set out to achieve as a business owner. And for me, I need a challenge. I want a challenge. And I was left with this feeling of, like, now what? At the time, I had the largest veterinary clinic in the Midwest. It was built a 20,000 square foot facility with an acre fenced in. I offered all the services our community was asking for, from grooming to luxury daycare and boarding and all these things. And I achieved all that. And then I felt I was being complacent sometimes, and I couldn't just sit on the bus and ride it anymore. And that's what I felt like I was doing. And so there wasn't that challenge. And ultimately I need a challenge, and because that's what I thrive on. And that ultimately, that loss of a challenge led to loss of passion for what I had a passion for so long. And then the second thing was I was just in extreme burnout and adrenal exhaustion. And it was really exacerbated by the pandemic. And there was just so much that encompassed the pandemic for a small business such as my own, that I was just toast. I was done, and managing 34 employees at the time, and all these things. I was just burned out, and it was showing. It was starting to show. And so, since self-care for me is such a huge piece of my recovery, I kind of knew, like, I needed to make a change in light of those other things, for my own self, for my own self-care. Those are two of the big reasons, I guess. Yeah.
I love it. I mean, that leads me to the next question of, for our audience, can you define and explain what a peer support specialist recovery coach does?
Yeah. And so that closing that one chapter is like, okay, great, Wes, what book are we going to pick up next? And for me, it was really an obvious choice because I was so involved in my own recovery. I wanted to become involved with the recovery community even more. And I wanted a big important thing for me was being of service, right? And so when I found out about peer support, recovery coaching as a possibility, it was kind of right, it was at that point, even before I had sold my business and made that decision, that I knew that that's the direction I wanted to go when that happened. So in terms of like, what is peer support or recovery coaching? There's one definition in particular that I really love and I think embodies peer support and recovery coaching. So much so I think that I've memorized it. But really, peer support it's a system of giving and receiving help founded on key principles. And those key principles are respect, shared responsibility, and mutual agreement on ultimately what is helpful. It's not based on psychiatric models, not diagnosed criteria. And it's really about understanding another situation empathetically through the shared experience of emotional and psychological pain. So that's the definition that I really like. I know it's kind of long-winded, right? But and I think some of the key words that stand out to me are mutual, respect, empathy. Those things are really important. So that's like a good definition. And I could go into a little bit more on, I can go into a lot more. There's a lot more detail I can go into if you'd like me to.
Yeah, I, I wouldn't mind hanging here for a little bit because I have
Let's
some
do
thoughts
that.
too.
All right.
I really love someone I look up to who's in long-term recovery, shared something with me that helped me a ton. That this is someone who believes in the disease concept. They said, Cliff, you were born with this. You are not responsible for your addiction, and you're not responsible for being an alcoholic. You are, however, responsible for your recovery.
Yep.
And that's inspiring and powerful. But it's hard to do alone. So I love mutual responsibility. Like, we are going to do this together, and all of us end up alone, right? But like, no one got into recovery on a winning streak, and no one hit their bottom, for lack of a better term, with a whole bunch of friends doing it together.
Right.
And rebuilding together is just so awesome. Everyone knows, that common thing that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. But Wes, I would love to hear your thoughts. Like, I hit the jackpot with a sponsor. Randomly met some guy in an AA room at the right time, at the right place, with the right people. And this guy, as a former athlete, like one of the best coaches I've ever had. Right. And we did the steps together. He took me through the whole book. Right. We did our inventory, figured out what people I was going to go to and make amends to. That is so hit or miss, though. Yeah. And there's no barriers to entry, right? There's no credentials. There's no certifications, right? It's just someone who raises their hand.
I'll do it.
Right, kind of, right? Like, super high risk. So, but AA has been awesome. It saved millions of lives. So where do you think we're going, right? Like, our company is Recovery.com. Mentoring, teaching, coaching, connection is such a huge part of recovery. And you're in it, man, right? Like, you're helping a caseload of people, if that's the right term. Where do you think this thing is going?
It's starting to, in terms of like the peer support movement, it's definitely starting to become a little bit more mainstream. When I was going through, let's just call it my 8 years of recovery, and that early part was like, up and down, right? Never once. It wasn't until 2021 that my counselor mentioned a peer support specialist, and that when it came up in a discussion of, I'm probably going to check out from the vet field, like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, hey, have you ever heard about? So there's still a lot of work to be done on awareness of who we are, what we do. And I think, and there's a lot of thought. I mean, there's a lot of work that still has to be done. But where do I see it going? Is, I see recovery as it's a big puzzle, right? And I am but one small piece of that puzzle. And there on that puzzle board is a sponsor, is your AODA counselor, is your therapist, is your primary care physician, is your friend, your family, the other people that you're connected to, the community that you're tied to, the activity, all these different things. So in one sense, we can be a big part of one person's recovery, but really I want to be as small as I possibly can for the most part and fill them up with all these other things to where I'm not the only one that they have to rely on. And I see, where this is going and where the movement is really taking itself is it's gaining more traction, and more traction every week and month that goes by. It's still a relatively new field, but it's gaining a lot of traction. It's getting the recognition from the professionals that it really needs to kind of get to incorporate the pieces of that puzzle together, be it counselors and therapists and those sorts of things, because we're part of a care team. We're not the only piece of the team. So I see it gaining traction. I see it getting continuing to grow, continue to be incorporated into healthcare settings on a wide variety of levels, on many multidisciplinary healthcare settings type things, and it's being done. It's being done now. UW Health just hired its first embedded peer support at the ER department, or they're finishing their hiring process for it. But that's just something here locally where they're embedding their first ones, and they're modeling it a lot of what's happening at UMass, University of Massachusetts General Hospital there, and in Connecticut. And for that, we have almost approaching a decade of research showing that it works. But a lot of it is it's got to be financed, if you will. It's got to be shown that it works and that it's, for lack of a better description, a little bit profitable for people to have it in order for it to happen.
So I have experienced the benefit of having an awesome mentor, teacher, coach, peer support specialist, sponsor, whatever you want to call it. Huge advocate of it. I just don't know how you structure it, right? Like, one thing I thought was the municipality provides us with resources based on a tax revenue basis. We get schools, we get streets, we get trash pickup, we get policemen, we get firefighters. Do we have peer support specialists that are just a part of it, right? I think you could make a huge, compelling ROI that expenses for that municipality are going to go down when we have more people in recovery, less emergency room visits, less arrests, less court cases, less divorce courts, less blah, 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 blah. But personally, I don't think the public sector does a great job, right? So where does it live, Wes? Is it privatized? Is it public? Is it a hybrid? Is it the provider? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know the direct answer to your question either. I can tell you what I've seen and experienced, and what I've seen and experienced, it's working. You mentioned the courts and all these different things. We have, like, right here in Madison, we have one of the best drug courts in the country. Judge Mitchell is the judge presiding over drug court. He incorporates peer support. Peer support is embedded in the OWI court and the drug court here in Madison. And why? Because they see that it works. And they're seeing the effects of it and the benefits of it, of people graduating through drug court sooner, with higher skills afterwards, all these things. But for my organization, I work for an organization called Safe Communities. Half of my time is spent with community peers, and then my other half, I'm an embedded peer at UW Hospital in a medication for opioid use disorder walk-in low barrier clinic. But in my organization of Safe Communities, we're funded. We get our funding to pay for our services from city level, county level, and state level because they do see those benefits. So it's its own business, if you will. It's a our in particular is a nonprofit, and there's thousands of us around the country. And our services are free to anybody that wants to utilize them because we are funded through those various avenues. So anybody can call us from, we serve a diverse group of individuals, from individuals that are homeless, white collar, blue collar, black, white, brown, purple, like anything, and any single person can pick up the phone and work with a recovery coach. Right now, unfortunately, our wait list is between 4 and 5 weeks long. And we're not the only organization in Madison. There's about 6 of us. I think we have an upwards of a little over 24 certified peer support specialists at our organization. But we're seeing the cities and counties, municipalities recognize that benefit and engaging with our organization or organizations like us.
Wes, I was wondering if you would be willing to, for people who maybe aren't familiar with what peer support or recovery coaching would look like, if you could just do like a
overview,
high level, like what do you say when you meet them? What are you curious about knowing? Sure. What are those first steps for anyone who's like, this sounds interesting. What might this be like?
Yeah. So really what we do is we utilize our shared lived experience with mental health and substance use disorder to support others on their own individual journey. I think some of the key points are we walk alongside an individual. We don't walk in front of, we don't pull. We believe that individuals ultimately know what's best for their recovery. We help them establish what goals they want to achieve, and then we help them and support them in them trying to achieve those goals. And we unpack things together so that they can really, ultimately achieve those goals. I would kind of liken it to, I am not a dancer. You will not find me on a dance floor. But I liken it to you're working with somebody in more of a dancing relationship as opposed to a wrestling relationship. You are really flowing with that person versus trying to push them into this, pull them into that, throw them into this. You're really working with them in that sort of a, relationship. And our services really are, there's no like preset, this is how we're going to do it. Ultimately, it's based upon the needs and wants of that individual because they're the conductor, they're the driver, and we're helping them kind of achieve those goals. So, and Cliff kind of alluded to this earlier, like the forced sobriety. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And so whatever I want does not, even though I may want something or I'm pushing something, you need to go to treatment. If he doesn't want it or she doesn't want it, it's going to fall flat on its face 9 times out of 10. So it's really getting yourself off of that bus or off of that pedestal of I did it and this is how you need to do it. And so that's why sometimes I don't like the word coaching, because coaching kind of implies do this, go there, run this route, do this. Yeah. So we're walking alongside them. And it can be, do people want to meet virtually? Do they want to meet in person? Do they just want to phone and text? Do they want to do that once a week, twice a week, or once a month? So it's really what they want, and we tailor our needs to what they're kind of ultimately, looking for. I think, what skills do you need to have aside from maybe that lived experience, the training you receive, the ongoing continuing education? I think the biggest skill that a peer support specialist or recovery coach needs to have is active listening. And it's listening to understand. It is not listening to respond. I love that phrase. And, my talking, I kind of look at it as my talking should really comprise like at most 10, but probably closer to 5% of our engagement that day. It's listening. And, another skill is, some people assume as a recovery coach or peer support specialist, you need to be telling them your story. My first rule of thumb is never do any harm. So I really need to be cognizant of what parts of my story do I tell. For me, I have to make sure I'm telling a story that involves a scar and not a wound, first and foremost, right? Wounds they're still kind of sticky. So I focus on my scars, not my wounds. But do I have their permission to share? Is it going to benefit them? If it's not going to benefit, why share it? And I think, and you mentioned, like, what do you kind of do? I mean, there's a lot that gets done in the first couple of meetings. Boundaries are set. Two things that I do, I call it WTF. And it's not it's what's the function. So this is something that they unpack with their therapist, with their counselor, but I also get to help them unpack that. Their substance, it was serving a function. What function was that serving? Let's really look at that. And what can we do to replace that or to change that? So I call it my WTF questions. And then the other one is I call it my what's in your cup. Mala, right now you just drank something. What did you drink from your mug?
Coffee.
Coffee. So, someone bumps into you, Mala, and you spill your coffee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you spill your coffee?
Because of the impact from the other individual.
Okay.
And
that's one reason.
Meeting my own.
Yep. And my what I talk to my peers about is because you had coffee in your cup. If you had juice in your cup, it would be juice, right?
Yeah.
So some people talk about it as having a tool belt. I like to talk about it as what's in your cup. We need to because the bumps in life, the stress, the fear, the anxiety, all those things, those are going to be bumping into us all the time. So what are we going to replace that current substance that's in our cup? What can we replace and put in that cup instead? So when that bump happens, joy is going to spill out. Happiness is going to spill out. Something else is going to spill out. So those two questions I like. And for me, what do I find rewarding? For me, it could be the very simple things in life, but it's those aha moments that are it can be a smile from your peer. It can be a hug, a laugh together. Obviously the tears that you shed together. And obviously it's the times when you're like, man, thank you so much. Or they just don't even have the words to describe what you've done for them over the last 6 months. And it's not all puppies and unicorns, right? But it's a lot of those aha moments that I find the most rewarding.
Yeah, Wes, you're a seeker, and you're a learner, and you're a great student, and you're definitely a half measures avail us nothing kind of person. I can tell with your intensity and your energy of how you tackle things and how you get after things. And I admire that. That's the person I want to be. And you've got such a passion about this. I'm reading this awesome book right now. I just want to share it with you. It's called Mad in America. I don't know if you guys have heard of this book, but it's a history. It's called Bad Science, Bad Medicine in the Enduring Mistreatment of the Mentally Ill. And it's a critical history of how we've treated people with mental illness in this country. I've learned so much from reading this. I think I'm a big 12-step guy. I love AA. It's been wonderful for me. It's a huge part of my recovery. And millions of people have been fixed in a non-medical, non-pharmaceutical way from using that program. I love your emphasis on empathy and respect and mutual understanding. What this book reminded me of. So back in the late 1800s, they didn't know how to take care of the mentally ill, right? They were confused. We're still confused. But the group of people that originally tackled that problem was the Quakers, which was a pacifist, nonviolent sect. And they built these hospitals or these places. They weren't medical or clinical, but their emphasis, they called it moral treatment. And they treated, and their belief was every human being should be treated with tremendous dignity, respect, and kindness. And the efficacy was good. The outcomes were good. And then it changed. And it got into, electroshock therapy and medication, et cetera. And it became an absolute disaster. And I love the foundational approach that the peer support groups are taking, right? Of harm reduction, meet them where they are, empathy, and leading that way. Wes, is that naturally who you are? Like, are you a high empath person? Have you always been kind, thoughtful, loving, and caring about other people? Is that natural for you?
It is very natural for me. It wasn't during my drinking years. In my substance use years, I was not that person, but I very much was that way as a child, as a young adult. I personally think that I'm that way even now.
I think you are.
In
That's the only guy I know, actually.
I know Wes pretty well, and I can testify to that.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's it comes easy. It doesn't in natural. It doesn't mean that sometimes it's not hard, depending upon circumstances and situations that you may find yourself in with a peer. But it's setting aside all of those things for that individual, and nothing else matters except who's in front of you right there. And just being very empathetic, being open-minded. I've worked with individuals that are in jail for murder, that have multiple counts of sexual assault. You have to set those different. They're still a human being, and they're still a human being yearning for recovery. And you still have to approach those individuals the same way that you would somebody else. And most of the time, I try not even if I'm serving a jail peer, I don't even really care. I don't want to know what it is they're there for, because I'm there for them, not for past mistakes that have been made, and we've all made them.
Hey, Dr. Mala, I would love your input there as a PhD, clinical person with the highest level of training. When you were going through all of your work, was there compassion, empathy, emphasis in training? And do you think on the clinical side, we maybe could do more there? I would love your thoughts on that.
Don't get me started.
Oh, I will. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I just did.
Yeah. So I, in terms of my training, I was very fortunate because I came from a program that really emphasized empathy a lot, and compassion. And the way we were also trained was not to think of it from you're sitting across from somebody, but you're standing alongside them, you're sitting next to them to help them. And there are various therapeutic methods also that reinforce that, even in person structuring of therapeutic sessions. So I was really fortunate because my program reinforced it and also reinforced a very eclectic approach to working with your people. From that point on, my whole thing has always been, I'm not going to try to put, a round peg in a square, shape or anything like that. You've got to be able to meet the person who you're working with where they're at and utilize the tools as a clinician, as a therapist that will best suit them. And let me tell you, I wish, like in the 20 plus years of practice that I've had, like, I wish peer support and recovery coaching was just part of the system. Now, here's the other thing that I'll say is that without even calling it that, a lot of the program development that I was able to be involved in and do incorporated that, because I take a very integrative approach. Integrative approaches has always been part of my passion as well. Program development, another passion as well. And there's always been some element of that, whether it's through coaching and teaching the clinicians to do that, or whether it's bringing additional people in to do that. So I'm thankful that I had, the foundations of being able to reinforce this, but I love this because like peer support, recovery coaching, it is so needed, right?
Yeah. Like good people have been doing this work forever. I think we call it great friends,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
Wes, do you kind of feel like, and I bet a lot of these people don't have great friends, right?
Right.
Like, do you feel like that's part of the gig is like, I get to be friends with these people?
Mm-hmm.
And you probably have to set some boundaries. That's
There's
dangerous.
definitely some boundaries, and that is the friend component. Is there's a lot of strong boundaries that do have to be set there.
For
But I
sure.
won't lie, it's hard not to form really
Totally.
strong relationships
Yeah.
with people. You know.
And is that bad, Wes? Like is it? What's the thing? Client privilege, whatever. You're not supposed to violate that. Like you're not going and hanging out with these people outside of the work capacity.
That's
Are
the
there?
beauty of it. I can take my peer fishing. We can go bowling. Like, I mean, there's one of my peers I've been working with for 9 months almost. I just met him yesterday. We usually go to a restaurant. So,
Yeah.
but we're working on some things with him that deem going to a restaurant and interacting with people is important. And going to a grocery store and seeing other people is really important. But I get to do those things with people. Go to the park and play pickleball with my peer, a couple weeks ago, and because that creates that trust. It does. You have to really. It's a building relationship thing, and so many people that I encounter, they're not necessarily all that trusting right away.
Yeah.
No matter
Right.
where they're at
Right.
and
Yeah.
things. And so it takes a little while to build that trust. And so doing some of those things builds it. But there is, it's a fine line. It's a fine line, the friend piece versus your peer support specialist piece. It's a little bit of a fine line.
Amanda, I want you to go. I just want to say something really quick. I can't tell you, like the earlier parts of my internship training, like fresh out of school, when that realization that I ended up having where just simply going for a walk with the person that you're working with, taking them into a hike, for a hike, doing the fishing, sitting alongside them on a bench, right? Switching it up so that it's
You're not
not just
face to
that.
face.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like the power of that was amazing. And that was my aha moment, like early on, that made me realize like we have to do more than just this, right? We have to be open to meeting that person. And that, again, like I love that, this field that we have an entire field now where we can incorporate that for specific needs. So
And that's
that's
the
all I wanted to.
beauty. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of being able to do what a peer support specialist does, because it's part of a professional team.
Yeah.
But your psychiatrist isn't going to pick up the phone at 9 o'clock at night. Your sponsor probably will, right? But you have a sponsor and your peer support specialist. You can have both. Your psychiatrist, your counselor, they can't walk to Wendy's with you and talk and build that kind of a relationship, and do some of those things that we're able to do. And it's been a privilege to be able to get to know. This one peer that I worked with, he wanted me to come to his therapy session with them. He'd been going to this person for 6 months or more. I said, sure, like I'm happy to do that. What are we trying to accomplish here? She was like, who the hell are you and what do you want? Why are you here? And even though signed ROI, my peer was there, yeah, wants to be here. Lo and behold, by the end of that appointment that he had, she was asking so and so, maybe would you like him to come to the next one? And then she actually invited me to her office to talk about what peer support does. And now she refers people to us all the time now.
100%.
And so I love that education
That's
piece
yeah.
and being able to be a part of that, of bringing awareness,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I will say, like, I was the person, and I have had quite a bit of experience, and it's easier when you're in a residential setting for sure. But I was that person, man. I was walking with them to Wendy's. I was
Yeah.
walking the hikes with them because it was just so powerful. We were doing yoga and breathing and all of the things. Again, integration. Love it. Love that this exists.
Yeah.
Amanda, I know you had your mute button off. Go for it.
Well, I have so many questions. I am a big fan of peer support, and there is a mentorship program through the IOP that was my step down after residential that I credit with ultimately helping the lights come on for me. And so I know that peer support, mentorship, coaching, relationship of walking alongside, and I liken it to kind of helping someone figure out how to live life, like not in a bubble. So, Wes, I'm just wondering if you could speak to, is the barrier to entry too low? Is it just right? Is it too high to become a peer support specialist or recovery coach? What would you, if anything, like to see changed with that? And then also, if you could speak to maybe some of the challenges you see in the peer support landscape. Is it funding? Is it getting the word out? Is it all of the above?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to start to address your questions as I remembered them. So if I forget something, just chime in or let me know at the end. But I think some of the biggest challenges, and I mentioned the one, is just knowledge about us and knowledge to the masses, bringing that information to the masses of. I only found out about peer support. It was 3 years ago that I found out about it. There's so many people that you talk to. I went to an NA meeting with my peer this last Sunday, and afterwards there was a group of like 5 of us that were chatting. My peer and the 4 others. The 4 others didn't even know. They had no clue that something like that was available to them. So I think that is a big challenge that we face is getting the information out there that this is available, that it's not just for the executive making $300,000 a year that can afford to pay for it. That this can be for everybody or anybody that wants recovery. I think another barrier is, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, is that breaking down of the integration of our services into a core kind of healthcare team, sort of an approach, training and things along those lines. I think that there should be a barrier to training, and where I think. Let me start with once you are certified. I think that it's important that continuing education is had. I think that there needs to be some standardization that occurs within our profession.
What are the current continuing education requirements, if there are any?
Yeah, so it's going to vary from state to state. The state of Wisconsin is 20 hours every 2 years.
How many hours was the initial training?
So the initial training is, why are you asking me that one? I know it's right on tip. I want to say it's like 48, right around 48.
Okay.
So, and the process to getting it's a very, right now there's very little trainings, which is a problem for the profession. In terms of for the state of Wisconsin certified peer support specialist, there are very few trainings. If I can remember the very first one and it's very specific to your county. So, for example, I want to say it was 2023. There was only 2 trainings offered for Dane County. And one of those had like 400 applicants, and we're talking for 15 spots. It can be very difficult. So there's a little bit of a weeding out process that happens there in terms of there is an application, mini essay questions, then there's a one-on-one interview that occurs, and then you get accepted into a training or not. I struggle sometimes with that barrier to entry, because I think you make it too difficult, and some of the people that need us the most, who would benefit from somebody with, let's just call it a colored background per se, may not be able to work with somebody who might serve them better, be better served by than somebody with a lesser colored background per se. By that I mean referring to legal issues or whatever it might be. The hard part is how do you vet lived experience, right? Are you going to ask for medical records proving that you've had a diagnosis of substance use disorder or opioid use disorder or that sort of a thing? So I struggle with that one a little bit. If someone says they have shared or lived experience and you get the sense from them based upon your interviews and anything like that, that they have a passion for wanting to do this work, what maybe that's okay. I think two different schools of thought there in terms of like CCAR. They do the recovery coach certification. Their stance is you don't need any lived experience whatsoever. You can be a parent or a loved one. You could never have drank a single drop of alcohol or used a single substance in your life and still become a certified recovery coach through them. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
I know how I feel about it.
I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it, because and where that struggle comes in is this is about lived experience with the individual sitting in front of you. Granted, my experience in substance use is going to be different than Joe's and Bob's and Jane's, but you felt a lot of the same feelings. You've gone through some of the same struggles. And I think that's important. I do think that's important.
I mean, I want to add to that for sure. I mean, from a clinical perspective, we're taught early on, like your experiences don't matter whether you've had them or not, because you want to be kind of that blank canvas to be able to take on and listen and reflect, with and to the person who's sitting in front of you, and be essentially that canvas that they can paint their story on and have objective reflections. But oftentimes, as we all know, people need somebody else who's lived that experience in order to feel, just at the basic level, not alone. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this so much, because, for whatever I wouldn't be able to provide, right, for sure, a peer support specialist would, because they have that lived experience.
Yeah. I think one of the other questions you asked was standardizing or, that sort of a thing. I think there's a couple of legislative-ish type things come to mind for me. One is, I think there really needs to be some legislation and policy change regarding, one, establishing a standard occupational classification for peer support workers. Any of you have any idea how many certified peer support specialists there are in the United States right now currently?
I know you do.
Take a guess.
5,000.
20,000.
70,000. So there's
Okay.
70,000.
Yeah.
This
That's
does
awesome.
not include certified recovery coaches. It would include them if they're also a state certified peer support specialist from any number of the states that have it. But there's 70,000. But I think there needs to be a standardized occupational classification for peer support workers. And then the question is why? Because I think, one, it establishes peer support specialists that they're included in workforce and labor statistics. I think it helps facilitate workforce planning, development, standardization, and it kind of ensures that our role is recognized and valued.
Well, you make it official, then that means there's a billable code, right? And
that
going
goes
back
to my next point.
Right?
That's my next point is making peer support recovery coaching available to all individuals with private health insurance, as opposed to right now, just individuals that have Medicaid and are participating in CCS or community comprehensive services, but making this service available through health insurance for all. I think those are the couple of things for me that come to mind, kind of legislation policy wise.
Just to be clear, anybody, even if they do have I have private health insurance. I can get a peer support specialist today, can't I? It would be free.
Not through your insurance.
Well, right. But if I called your
Yes.
recovery community organization and I got on that 5-week wait list, I could be matched with a peer support specialist. Now, the problem is that then your employer wouldn't get paid by anyone, because Medicaid pays for the people they cover, right, to receive peer support
Correct.
specialists, but private insurance does not.
Mhm.
Correct.
So essentially, the people who can pay, I mean, theoretically,
Yes.
private insurance should have more resources than. Anyway, I just think
Mhm.
it's a little bit backwards.
It is backwards.
You
Yeah.
can just go to A and press roll the dice with a sponsor.
And I think, and my thought process would be have both.
Yeah.
You know?
Or
Yeah.
you can pay, as we know.
Yep, you can private pay.
Pocket. The people are paying top dollar out of pocket for recovery coaches. So it's really interesting what's happening in this space right now.
Some people are preferring to pay out of pocket because they don't want the hassle.
Yeah, and Dr. Mala, same thing. Like some people pay out of pocket to go to treatment rehab, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not in network, right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Amanda, sorry.
Yeah, I just really want to stress the fact that it's not either or, like you just said. Like, I had a mentor, I had a sponsor, I had a therapist, I had, I mean, I had all of the things. I needed all of those things.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's an either or.
Yeah.
In the same way, I don't think it's either or to going to treatment. I mean, Wes has worked with some people, I'm sure, who the decision has been made that treatment is the next step for them, or but they have to come to that decision. But so it's not peer support or treatment. It's both. And it's also, like I said before, the best way to help someone figure out how to live, like not in the 30-day, 60-day treatment bubble, which is talk about forced sobriety. I mean, there's literally nothing to find. And then they set you free, and there's a liquor store on every corner. Peer support can help you figure out how to live life on life's terms.
Yeah. No, I love that you said that. And it's so true, because it's not either or. That's actually why I lean back on that whole integrative approach. I think we're getting there. There's motion, but it's so important to keep an open mind to be able to integrate these resources, as many as you need, to define and facilitate and help support your journey, your personal journey, 100%. Yeah. So, Wes, I know we're running out of time here, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own personal practices and, advice that you would give to people based on those practices. I know you've got some daily routines and things that you like to engage in. So what does that look like?
I really tried to focus on, like, for me, a lot of the self-care was focusing on eating, because I wasn't. I mean, there was some things, but I had lost a lot of weight. So it was focusing on eating. It was focusing on sleeping, and getting adequate sleep. I had one of the relapse prevention groups that I took had a focus on mindfulness and meditation. And that really served me in early recovery. I'd like to say that I meditate for 2 hours a day right now, but I guarantee you that I don't. But it served a purpose back then. For me, activity, exercise, just being active, like going out on walks and things along those lines, reading. But I couldn't imagine not reading. And I'm not talking about reading like highly scientific stuff. A lot of what I'm reading is like thriller, fun stuff per se, that just is absolutely nonsense. But I love that stuff. I think there's a lot of other things that for me, being in a loving, emotionally healthy relationship, learning to set boundaries, learning to say no, to be a little bit more of a no man than a yes man. And I had a really hard time with that, because I was a people pleaser. I was a go goer. I mean, who I am now and what I look like now is just a figment of what I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, in terms of some of those things. But getting the physical activity, the reading, exploring new hobbies, and ditching ones that no longer serve me. Those are some of the things. Yeah.
I love that you're emphasizing that ability to say, you know what, this doesn't serve me right now. So I'm going to take that healthy risk and try something new, because that could serve me. And if it does, I'm sticking with it. That's so important for people to hear, So looking ahead, what are your aspirations for the peer support profession and recovery advocacy over the next few years?
Yeah, I have a few, I guess I'll call them irons in the fire right now. I'm just like ready to go, I just have so many things and ideas that I want to do. And I think the biggest part really revolves for me around one thing that I see a huge need for is the building of a wider peer support network, and really a network, if you will, that is there serving the peer supporters themselves. Not necessarily individuals in recovery in a roundabout way, right? It does. But, I want to really help unite the peer support workforce and by creating a little bit of a community for them. So, this is really hard work. It's really hard work. It's rewarding, but it's really hard. And, I would love to build and have a place where peer support workers can come to for support. And by support, what I mean is for example, a podcast that they can listen to, where they can listen to it in between where they're going or whatever, where they're learning something from other peer support workers, from mental health professionals, from substance use disorder professionals. So it's somewhere they want to go to gain some more insight and enhance their own skills. I envision like creating a forum where peer support workers, they have X, Y, or Z situation happening and they're like, I don't freaking know what to do, but they're able to kind of, point of care right away, be able to maybe engage with and get 10, 15, 20 responses from people around the country or the world who had faced a similar sort of situation with their peer. I'd like there to be, so I kind of see that as like an on-demand sort of a thing for peer support workers. Resources for ongoing continuing education. They're like, all right, I got a couple hours here. Let me hop on this resource that's got a calendar that says I can learn about harm reduction right now, or I can learn about stigma, or I can blah, 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 blah. So kind of really coalescing resources for that. I'd love to do like an annual peer fest somewhere to where you get 300-400 people from wherever, and you're holding a peer fest and you're bringing in some speakers and you're really engaging and igniting that workforce, a searchable database of organizations such as myself. I just had an experience last week where someone wanted to find peer support in Kansas City. It's like impossible. And I'll even point to our own state, the state of Wisconsin, Milwaukee County. They have the most number of peer support workers and organizations than any other county or city in the state. And you go to try and find somebody, you're pulling teeth. So trying to form something that is easily, kind of like what Recovery.com does for treatment centers, unites patients with treatment, but uniting peer support workers with other peer support workers. A lot of times people are moving, so I'm trying to find them support in other places, and a place for individuals such as John, who hops on his computer at midnight because he knows he has a problem and he's heard about a recovery coach. Where can I find one? Those are some of the things, Dr. Mala.
I love it. And you've got my brain going, which is so exciting. So exciting. All right. Last question. What does recovery mean to you?
Well, recovery to me means getting my life back, giving up one thing for everything, not living in guilt or shame from my past of substance use, feeling safe, comfortable, and confident in my own skin, and doing so sober. And it means feeling my feelings. It means honesty. It means strength. And ultimately, it really means freedom. So that's my definition.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much for your time, Wes. It really has been an honor and a pleasure. And I would love to talk to you again.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I think that was the best answer we've gotten to that question. Yeah, I'm not biased, but
you talked about cups earlier, Wes. You made my cup full today. So,
yes.
Man, good. So thank you so much.
Good.
100%.